The headlights of my Chevy cut through the desert darkness like searchlights, illuminating nothing but endless asphalt and the occasional tumbleweed rolling across Route 66. I'd been driving for 12 hours straight, pushing through Arizona's desolate stretches with nothing but gas station coffee and stubborn determination keeping me awake. My eyes burned, my back ached, and the radio had given up on me somewhere outside Flagstaff, leaving me with nothing but the hum of tires on weathered pavement. That's when I saw a flickering neon sign that read Interstate Motel in faded pink letters, half of them dark or buzzing with electrical death rattles. The building squatted against the star-drunk sky like a concrete tumor. Its parking lot cracked and weedy, but it was civilization. It was a bed. I pulled into the lot, gravel crunching under my tires. The place looked like it had been abandoned since the Carter administration. Brown stucco walls stained with decades of desert rain. Windows dark except for the faint glow coming from what I assumed was the office. A few other cars sat scattered across the lot like sleeping metal beetles, their chrome dulled by dust and neglect. The office door chimed with a discordant bell as I pushed inside. Behind the counter sat a man who looked as weathered as the building itself. Thin gray hair, deep-set eyes, and skin like leather left too long in the sun. He glanced up from a small black and white television that was showing nothing but static. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice carrying the rasp of a lifetime smoker. "Just for the night," I said, pulling out my wallet. "Whatever you've got." He studied me for a moment, then reached under the counter and produced a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag. The number 312 was embossed in faded gold lettering. "Room 312, he said, sliding it across the counter. "End of the hall, second floor. Ice machine's broken, vending machine's got Coke and crackers if you need." I paid in cash, and he gave me directions to the stairs. As I turned to leave, I noticed him watching me in the reflection of the office window, his expression unreadable. The stairs creaked under my feet as I climbed to the second floor. The hallway stretched out before me, lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes that cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. The carpet was a faded burgundy that had probably once been elegant, now worn thin and stained with decades of foot traffic and spilled coffee. Room numbers marched along the walls in predictable sequence. 308, 310, 312, and 314. I stopped, key in hand, and counted again. 308, 310, 312, 314. Where was 313? I looked at the wall between 312 and 314, just blank stucco, painted the same institutional beige as the rest of the hallway. No door, no indication that a room had ever existed there. Hotels skip the 13th floor all the time, I told myself. Why not the 13th room? Room 312 was exactly what I'd expected, a time capsule from 1978. Complete with orange shag carpet, wood-paneled walls, and a bedspread that featured a pattern of brown and gold diamonds. The air smelled like old cigarettes and industrial-strength disinfectant. But it was clean enough, and the bed was soft when I sat down to pull off my boots. I flicked on the television, hoping for some late-night talk show to help me wind down. The screen flickered to life, showing what looked like a commercial for a long-defunct restaurant chain. The colors were oversaturated, the audio slightly out of sync, and the whole thing had that strange, dreamlike quality of old footage played on modern equipment. "Come on down to Sammy's Family Diner," chirped a woman in a beehive hairdo and a checkered uniform, "where every meal is a memory." The commercial cut to shots of families enjoying burgers and milkshakes, but something was off about their faces. Too bright, too perfect, like they were wearing masks. I changed the channel, but found more of the same. Commercials for products I'd never heard of, jingles that sounded familiar, but wrong, like half-remembered songs from dreams. I clicked through a dozen channels before giving up and turning the TV off. That's when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 deliberate raps, coming from the wall behind the headboard. The wall that should have been the exterior of the building, facing the parking lot. I sat up, listening. The sound came again, definitely from within the wall itself. Knock, knock, knock. I stood up and pressed my ear to the wall. The knocking stopped, replaced by a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the building's bones. It was the same sound I'd heard when I first arrived, that electrical buzz that old buildings make when their wiring is slowly failing. But underneath it, I could swear I heard something else. Something that sounded almost like voices. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to thin walls and inconsiderate neighbors. But as I lay in the dark, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the humming continued. Sometimes it would fade to almost nothing, then surge back with renewed intensity, like a radio station drifting in and out of range. Around 3 a.m., unable to sleep, I decided to get some ice from the machine the clerk had mentioned was broken. Maybe the walk would help clear my head. I slipped on my jeans and stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights had dimmed to a sickly amber glow, and the humming was louder out here, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I walked to the end of the hall, where a small alcove housed an ice machine that was indeed broken, its front panel hanging open like a mechanical mouth, revealing a tangle of frozen coils and disconnected wires. Next to it stood a vending machine, its glass front illuminated by an internal bulb that cast harsh shadows on the snacks inside. As I approached, I noticed something odd about the machine's placement. It seemed to be sitting slightly away from the wall, as if it had been moved. Curious, I squeezed behind it and felt around in the darkness, and my fingers found the edge of what felt like a door frame hidden behind the machine. The humming was louder here, accompanied by a smell that made my stomach turn something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I pushed against the vending machine, and to my surprise, it moved easily, sliding along the floor on hidden casters. Behind it was a door, painted the same beige as the walls, but somehow different older, as if it had been sealed away for decades. The number 313 was painted on the door in black numerals, but the paint was faded and chipped, barely visible in the dim light. My hand found the doorknob almost without conscious thought. It turned easily, and the door swung open with a sigh of stale air. Room 313 was a mirror image of my own room, but wrong in every possible way. The same orange carpet, the same wood paneling, the same diamond-patterned bedspread, but everything was faded, decayed as if decades had passed while the rest of the motel remained frozen in time. The air was thick with dust and that sickly sweet smell, and shadows seemed to move in the corners where the light from the hallway couldn't reach. On the dresser sat an old television, its screen dark but somehow reflective like black water. Next to it was a guest register, its pages yellowed with age. I approached it slowly, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. The register was filled with names and dates written in different hands with different pens. Some entries were from the 1970s, others from the 80s and 90s. Each guest had signed their name and the date of their stay, but the entries became increasingly strange as I read further. John Martinez, October 15th, 1977. Can't find the door. Sarah Wilson, December 3rd, 1983. The TV shows My Dreams. Robert Chen. August 22nd, 1991. I've been here before, and then, the bottom of the page. In handwriting I didn't recognize, but somehow knew was mine, my name. Today's date, I was always here. I stared at the entry, my hand trembling. I hadn't written it. I was sure I hadn't written it. But there it was, in black ink that looked fresh despite the aged paper. Behind me, the door slammed shut. I spun around, but the door was gone. The wall was smooth, unbroken beige stucco. I pressed my hands against it, searching for the doorknob, the frame. Any sign that there had ever been an opening? Nothing. The television flickered to life. On the screen, I watched myself sleeping in the bed behind Mitha. Same bed, the same room, but the image was grainy and distorted, like it was being broadcast from decades ago. The time stamp in the corner read dates from years past, but the person on the screen was definitely me, unchanged by time. I turned to look at the bed. It was empty, the covers undisturbed. When I looked back at the screen, the image had changed. Now it showed me standing in this very room, watching the television, an infinite loop of recursive observation. The figure on screen turned to look directly at me, and I saw my own face mouth words that came from the television speakers a split second later. You were always here. The room began to shift and blur around me. The walls breathed like living things, expanding and contracting with each beat of some massive hidden heart. The humming grew louder, resolving into what sounded almost like a lullaby sung by voices I couldn't quite place. I tried to run, but every step I took toward where the door should be only brought me back to the center of the room. The television showed me running, over and over, like a hamster in a wheel, while that other version of Mitha, one who had always been here, stood perfectly still and smiled. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, or maybe years. Time had no meaning in room 313. I watched myself sleep, wake, panic, and sleep again on the television screen, while the real me stood trapped in the center of the room, unable to move, unable to leave, unable to do anything but watch. Eventually, the exhaustion won. I collapsed onto the bed, and the last thing I saw before darkness took me was my own face on the television screen. Eyes closed, finally at peace. I woke up behind the front desk. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m., and through the office window, I could see headlights pulling into the parking lot. Lone traveler, looking tired and desperate, the same way I had looked when I'd arrived. How long ago was that? Days? Years? The memories felt distant, like half-remembered dreams. The door chimed, and the traveler stepped inside, a woman this time with dark circles under her eyes and the slightly wild look of someone who had been driving too long. "Need a room?" I heard myself ask, the words coming automatically. She nodded, pulling out her wallet. I reached under the counter and felt my fingers close around a key. When I brought it up, I knew without looking that it would be room 3112. As I slid it across the counter, I felt something in my pocket. A small weight, warm against my leg. I knew what it was without checking another key, the one that really mattered. The one that would always bring them back to where they belonged, room 313. The woman took the key and headed for the stairs. I watched her go, then turned my attention back to the small black and white television. The static swirled and danced, occasionally resolving into shapes that might have been faces, might have been memories, might have been dreams. In a few hours, she would hear the knocking. She would find the vending machine and the door behind it. She would see her name in the register and watch herself on the television screen. And then she would understand, as I had understood, as all the others had understood. We were always here. We would always be here. The Interstate Motel never closes, and room 313 is always waiting for the next guest who needs to come home.